Recently, the US media outlet Axios dropped a bombshell report. It revealed that President Trump lashed out at Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, shouting, "Are you completely crazy? Because of what you're doing, everyone hates Israel right now." Whether Trump actually used profanity in that private call isn't the point. The real core issue here is that the White House did not deny this report. By letting this leak, the US is sending a very deliberate, powerful signal to Iran and the international community. We have the will to end this war, now. But why is the absolute global hegemon, the United States, in such a desperate rush to set up a negotiation table? The real answer isn't hidden in the deserts of the Middle East. It is deeply rooted in the economic warning lights flashing right at the heart of America. Today on the Kairos, we will decode exactly how this geopolitical crisis is triggering an explosion in US inflation and mortgage rates, and more importantly, in the midst of this urgent push for peace, where your assets should be moving. Welcome back to the Kairos, where we decode the intersection of global macroeconomics and geopolitics. So, what is the fundamental fire burning under the Trump administration? The answer is simple: inflation. Following the outbreak of the war on February 28th, prolonged supply chain disruptions and instability in the Strait of Hormuz have sent US inflation back on an uncontrollable upward trajectory. When inflation spikes, it doesn't just force the Federal Reserve to hold rates higher for longer, it acts as the ultimate trigger, blowing up long-term yields across the market. With the November midterm elections just 5 months away, a resurgence of inflation and a structural high-rate new normal are lethal political poisons that could shake the entire administration. But the even more terrifying problem lies within long-term US Treasury yields. As the market dumps bonds to hedge against inflation, long-term Treasury yields are skyrocketing. The US government is already issuing massive amounts of new debt every single month just to cover its astronomical fiscal deficit. Rising yields mean the interest burden on this newly issued debt is growing exponentially. It's a vicious cycle where tax revenues are squandered on paying off debt interest rather than driving productivity. With an oversupply of bonds and a loss of control over long-term yields, the very ecosystem of US Treasury supply and demand is showing signs of a catastrophic credit freeze. And here, we must look at the most dangerous domino effect that mainstream media is completely ignoring: the link between long-term yields and the US real estate market. In the US, 30-year fixed mortgage rates move in lockstep with long-term Treasury yields, sharing over a 90% correlation. When Treasury yields spike, mortgage rates shoot up at an even steeper angle. Right now, US mortgage rates are crossing a critical threshold. This is a massive crisis that could collapse US real estate prices from the ground up. Potential homebuyers are stepping away from the market entirely as their monthly principal and interest burdens double. Housing transaction volumes have frozen solid. But a shrinking real estate market doesn't just mean a drop in asset values. Real estate makes up over 70% of the core wealth for the American middle class. When home prices fall and financing costs explode, household delinquency rates at financial institutions rise, bringing systemic credit risk to the surface. Most critically, this directly destroys the economic sentiment of the middle-class voters. When hundreds of extra dollars are drained every month just for mortgage interest and inflation eats away at the rest, consumer purchasing power completely suffocates. For the Trump administration, facing an upcoming election, the collapse of the housing market and the loss of middle-class sentiment is a far more terrifying reality than winning or losing a war overseas. Add to this the financial bleeding from the military. The drones and missiles launched by Iran and its proxies are cheap assets, costing anywhere from a few hundred to a few $1,000s each. In contrast, the Patriot or SEM-6 missiles the US fires to intercept them cost millions, sometimes tens of millions of dollars per shot. For the first time in history, the US is experiencing the brutal limits of cost-asymmetric warfare. Despite its overwhelming military might, America's fiscal stamina simply cannot sustain an endless war where it loses the economic math. Considering the strategic petroleum reserves and accumulating economic damage, the absolute deadline for the Trump administration to hold out is the end of June. But here we must uncover the terrifying hidden agenda of Iran that flips the entire board. While the US is desperate to close a deal within a month, Iran's supreme leadership has reached a chilling conclusion. Conflict is actually preferable to diplomacy. For decades, the US held a massive asymmetric advantage, using dollar hegemony and sanctions to suffocate Iran, while Tehran could do almost nothing in response. But the moment Iran choked off the Strait of Hormuz, that asymmetry was completely shattered. By shutting the strait, Iran has ensured that everyday American consumers feel direct economic pain whenever they go to the gas pump and the grocery store. Iranian elites firmly believe that over time, these crushing domestic economic pressures will force the Trump administration to surrender. Furthermore, Iran is using this blockade to compel European and Asian nations, desperate for oil, to circumvent US sanctions and seek bilateral trade directly with Tehran. In short, for Iran, the current negotiation table isn't about achieving peace. They are simply using diplomacy as a tool to manage the tempo of warfare, stalling for time to maximize their strategic leverage against the entire world. So, how does the US force a deal against an opponent playing the long game? The core agenda on the table to break this deadlock is Iran's nuclear sovereignty. The US wants to block uranium enrichment. Iran wants to maintain its nuclear sovereignty. To reconcile these two seemingly incompatible conditions, negotiators are crafting a highly sophisticated semantic magic trick, separating the possession of nuclear rights from the exercise of those rights. The language in the Memorandum of Understanding will likely sound something like this. Iran retains the inalienable right to peaceful nuclear energy development, as recognized by the NPT. The United States reaffirms this. However, during the confidence-building period, substantial nuclear activities within Iranian territory will be halted. With this, Iran can declare a domestic victory. Despite the attacks from the US and Israel, we defended our regime and officially secured our nuclear sovereignty for peaceful energy. Conversely, the US can pitch it as their win. We eliminated the fatal sunset clauses of the Obama era. We completely diluted and sealed their highly enriched uranium stockpile, permanently blocking their path to weaponization. This is a far better deal. It's the exact same substance, just wrapped in two different rhetorics of victory. To make this work, precise clauses are being fine-tuned. To ensure Iran's halt in nuclear activity doesn't look like a surrender, they will likely use the diplomatic wrapper of an international nuclear fuel consortium. Whether it's an offshore joint enrichment model where Iran holds a stake, or receiving enriched fuel from a third country, the optics will show the international community stepping in to cooperate with Iran. Regarding the 440 kilograms of 60% highly enriched uranium, the compromise will likely involve exporting half of it overseas in exchange for 5% civilian reactor fuel, while diluting the rest domestically under international supervision. The US will call it nuclear material removal, while Iran will call it a legitimate exchange for civilian power. And then there is the most difficult puzzle, the Strait of Hormuz. While a complete return to the pre-war status quo might be difficult immediately, a dramatic scene of thousands of civilian cargo ships passing through the strait will be orchestrated alongside the deal's conclusion. A powerful visual broadcasting the restoration of free navigation to the world. But with just about 3 years left in his term, President Trump might have a much grander reversal playing out in his head. The massive expansion of his greatest first-term diplomatic achievement, the Abraham Accords. His obsession with turning this war crisis into a Nobel Prize-level diplomatic legacy is beyond imagination. In fact, just before the war broke out, the Financial Times released a fascinating report. It revealed that during negotiations, the Iranian regime was preparing a bonanza for the United States, a massive business offer granting US corporations exclusive investment rights into Iran's dilapidated energy, oil, and critical mineral infrastructure. At the time, Israeli pressure caused the war to erupt instead. But now, facing inflation and a real estate crisis, Trump is highly likely to pull this card back out, lifting comprehensive sanctions on Iran in exchange for exclusive US capital entry into their energy infrastructure. Turning war into diplomacy and diplomacy back into business, that is the most quintessential Trump maneuver. Ultimately, this urgent peace negotiation scenario, driven by US inflation, mortgage rate shocks, and the middle-class asset crisis, leaves us with one clear conclusion. Even if the war stops and a deal is struck, the rules of the era of economic security will not change. National security and supply chain survival will continue to dominate economic efficiency. We hope today's analysis serves as a catalyst for a shift in your perspective. This has been the Kairos. Please subscribe and like to stay ahead of these massive global currents. Thank you.